Last week I began my homily by singing a familiar children's Christmas song. We all know it. It goes something like this. Oh, you better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. We all know it, our children in particular. Well, Santa has already come to town. He arrived at the Gardens Mall way before Thanksgiving. He was at the Palm Beach holiday boat parade last week. Santa was sighted at numerous Christmas tree ceremonies, and I even saw him at a football game on television. Yes, Santa has already come. But during this season of Advent, we are preparing for another coming. We are preparing ourselves to recognize the coming of Christ among us. Because angels appear so often in the scriptures, and I said last week over 300 times in the Old Testament and New Testament, and especially in the Christmas story, it was decided that during these weeks of Advent, we would reflect on how God uses angels to help us grow spiritually in order to recognize Christ among us. Last week we mentioned that the word angel means messenger. And if we learn anything from this series, keep this in mind and in heart. Angels are messengers from God. Bottom line, angels are messengers from God. We hear in the scriptures how angels brought God's message to Zechariah and the Blessed Virgin Mary. Angels appeared to Joseph and to the shepherds when Jesus was born. And the message that they brought to these people was, be not afraid. This message, be not afraid, is reflected in today's Old Testament reading from the prophet Isaiah. It begins by saying, comfort, give comfort to my people, says your God. I think most of us have attended a performance of Handel's Messiah. And if you have, do you remember the opening lines of the first tenor solo? It comes from this text from Isaiah. If you remember, the tenor sings a beautiful soothing song of comfort, a kind of a love ballad from God to his wayward people. In this song, God is offering comfort to an exiled people, a wayward people, the exiled Israelites. For 70 years, 70 years, the Israelites had been separated from their homeland, and many felt that God had abandoned them. They felt fearful, alone, and hopeless. Have you ever felt you were in exile, cut off from family, from our dreams, maybe even cut off from God? If so, God has a word for us: comfort. God is never far from us. God never abandons us, even when we have abandoned him. God always brings us comfort. And the angels are there to distribute God's comfort and hope to us. Just like the angels comforted the prophet Elijah when he was discouraged. Just like the angels comforted David when he was frightened and alone. Just like the angels comforted Jesus after his temptation in the desert when he felt alone and vulnerable. God sends angels to comfort us in our time of need. The prophet Isaiah continues to speak to us in our first reading when he says, a voice cries out in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord. Every valley shall be filled in, every mountain and hill shall be made low, and uneven ground shall become level, and the rough plains a broad valley. When Isaiah offered the Israelites God's comfort and the invitation to return to their homeland, some of them chose to stay in exile in Babylon. And why would you want to do that? Why did this happen? Well, after 70 years in exile, the next generation of Israelites had been born. The land of Israel was only a memory of their parents, not them. So this next generation of Israelites had made Babylon their home, and it was easier to hold on to what they knew than to venture out into an unknown future. How many of us cling to habits and places and jobs or relationships or beliefs because they have become too familiar and too comfortable to us? Those comfortable habits may seem like a deep valley or a crooked path in our lives, holding us back from what God really wants us to be and to become. We cling to them because we fear the unknown more than allowing God to make our way straight, level, and safe, just as he did for the exiled Israelites in the desert. And if God can do that for the Israelites, don't you think God can clear a straight path for you and me? And God sends his angels to support our spiritual journey, just as God sent angels ahead of Moses on the mission God gave him in Egypt. And just as God sent angels to lead Joshua and the Israelites into the promised land, and sent angels to the leaders of the early church in those confusing moments of the resurrection, God sends angels to us to open our hearts and strengthen and make straight our crooked paths, to lead us on the straight path toward God. And lastly, Isaiah says to us, "Then the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all people shall see it together." If we recognize that God is always with us, comforting us in our time of need, and if we allow that comfort to open our hearts and change the path of our lives, it is then that the glory of the Lord will be revealed through us for all people to see. Remember, angels are messengers from God, and we, like the angels, can share God's message of comfort, change, and glory. Many of you know that I went on the Camino de Santiago about 4 years ago. I walked as a pilgrimage, a 500-mile walk from Saint Jean, France, to Santiago, Spain, where the remains of St. James, the Apostle of Jesus, is buried. And 2 weeks into the walk, I encountered an angel, and his name was Victor. You might have a picture of that. There it is. Okay. You know, Victor's on the left, by the way. And in those 2 weeks, every day we went to Mass at the church we were at, and the village that we stopped at. And Victor was always there. He was always there before Mass began, reverently went up to Holy Communion, and then he would stand outside the doors of the church with his hand like this, saying nothing. And every time I passed him, I gave him €2 or some euros that he could use. And one day, I stopped and I went really outside of my boundaries here. I went and began talking with him in my broken Spanish. And he was talking to me in his broken English. He had started the walk, not from Saint Jean, but from Rome to Santiago on the west coast of Spain. And he, what they would call, was a true pilgrim because he depended upon the generosity and care of others for his survival. We like to carry a lot of stuff with us. And when you're carrying stuff on your backpack, it gets heavy. And we begin giving that stuff away. But Victor started with nothing or hardly anything. And he looked much different there than when I first saw him. He was walking with sandals. He had no jacket. He had no water bottle. And people began giving him things, caring for him along the way for his survival. And they called him my angel because Victor called me to share what I had with him. Not only sharing a couple of euros with him each day, but to sit down with him and share our journeys of faith with each other. That's much more valuable than any money. Pope Francis once said, "Whenever we encounter another person in love, we encounter God." And I found that to be true with my encounter with Victor. I called Victor my angel because he showed me that simplicity of life leads us to holiness. Simplicity of life leads us to holiness. See, what happens, we are so busy with life that we forget to see God in the simple. And it really awakened me to see God's presence in the simple, ordinary things of life. I mentioned this when I gave this presentation. I came to see the extraordinary, which is God, in the ordinary things of life. And through Victor, I came to see the glory of God. And at the end of a day's walk, I would, when we hadn't seen Victor on that day, I would mention to my walking companion, "We haven't seen our angel today." And suddenly, Victor would appear, shining the light of glory for all to see. You see, we too can be messengers from God by offering comfort and hope, by sharing God's transforming love, and by being God's light in our darkened world. It doesn't take much. Just simple acts of kindness and sharing can make all the difference in the world.